Hey guys, tonight we walk into a winter. So cold it feels like the air could crack if you breathe too sharply. Snow drifts in quiet heaps along the edges of a small stone farmhouse. And somewhere inside, a newborn cries for the very first time. Not a heroic cry, more like a squeak. The sound of someone not quite convinced this world is a good idea. That someone is you, Isaac Newton. Born early, born tiny, born fatherless, and born into a storm that seems almost too dramatic for a rural English village in 1642. You might think the universe is already foreshadowing something, and you'd be right. A candle sputters beside your mother's bed, the flame shaking every time wind claws at the shutters. The midwife whispers that you're so small you could fit inside a quart mug. Historians still argue whether she meant that literally, but if they're debating your cup size, congratulations, you're destined for greatness. The important part is, no one expects you to survive. Not the neighbors, not the doctor, maybe not even your mother, but you do, because stubbornness is your first scientific principle. Your earliest moments are wrapped in the sounds of creaking beams, moaning wind, and distant church bells, the same bells tolling for your father, who died 3 months before you arrived. It's an eerie symmetry. A birth paired with a burial. A new mind entering the world just as another leaves. One mainstream historical fact whispers through the room. You are born the same year Galileo dies. A cosmic baton handoff, if you will, though, to be honest. You won't care about that for another few decades, and only in the nerdiest way possible. Your mother holds you like a fragile experiment, adjusting her grip as if you might dissolve. You smell like milk and cold wool. She smells like exhaustion and fear. There's a superstition in the village that children born during storms are either cursed or chosen. Fringe tidbit. Some locals truly believe lightning writes omens into the bones of newborns. And while there's no thunder tonight, the wind crashes hard enough to make the rafters tremble, which is basically medieval Dolby Atmos. You grow up in a world where time is measured by church bells and chores, not clocks. But even as a toddler, you stare at falling snowflakes longer than seems normal, tracking their descent as if trying to decode their secret geometry. This is your first unofficial experiment, observing motion. That's right, while other kids are eating mud or trying to pet angry chickens, you're squinting at tiny ice crystals like a mini philosopher. But childhood is not peaceful. When you're 3, your mother remarries and leaves you behind with your grandparents. She walks away without looking back, and something inside you freezes harder than that first winter storm. You learn that people can vanish the way sparks fade from a candle wick, and it leaves you with a lifelong need for control, precision, and let's be honest, revenge through academic excellence. You start building things. Little mechanical toys, windmills, water wheels. You carve wooden gears and place them near windows just to watch them spin. You stand in the yard with cheeks numb from the cold, testing how wind direction affects rotation. No one asks you to do this. You just need to understand the universe, because understanding means power, and power means no one can leave you again. But there's something else, something stranger. You talk to yourself. A lot. Not in a voices from the void way, but in a very intense running commentary about shadows, angles, and why that one rooster seems to be plotting your death. Light joke number 1. That rooster absolutely was plotting your death. Roosters are tiny, feathery gangsters. When your mother eventually returns without your stepfather, who conveniently disappears from your story like a poorly written side character, you barely recognize her. The reunion is awkward, quiet, and full of unspoken algorithms. It's the first time you practice emotional calculus. And spoiler, you never really solved that equation. Still, you survive. More than survive, you adapt. You become a child who observes everything, absorbs everything, questions everything. And maybe that's what the storm was telling the world when you were born. Here comes someone who won't accept anything at face value. Not snowflakes, not family, not gravity, not God. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You grow into a lanky, observant child who walks as if you're always halfway inside your own head. The village around you is slow fields. Sheep, rain, repeat. But inside you, gears are already turning. You find patterns in everything. When a door swings open, you track the arc. When a bucket drops into a well, you count the seconds until the splash. When your mother scolds you, you wonder whether sound travels differently depending on how disappointed she is. Light joke. Scientists still argue whether angry mom acoustics should qualify as a new branch of physics. Your hands become your first laboratory instruments. You build little carts that move when you pull a string, windmills that spin when you blow on them, and tiny lanterns with paper shutters to control the light. You aren't trying to play. You're trying to measure, to test, to discover which invisible rules keep the world from collapsing into nonsense. It makes you odd, but odd is the soil genius grows in. One mainstream historical fact. You famously built a working model of a windmill as a child, one that actually ground grained. While other kids were bragging about who could throw a rock the farthest, you were busy engineering the agricultural revolution in miniature. You sit in the dirt, fiddling with tiny wooden blades, adjusting their angle, making notes in your head you'll never write down. Because writing things down isn't your habit yet, but observing is, and remembering, and obsessing. Your classmates think you're strange. You stare too long at ants. You pull apart clocks the way some kids pull apart berries. You watch candlelight flicker across stone walls and wonder if shadows have weight, the kind of question only a child untouched by cynicism could ask. Your mind wanders, leaps, cartwheels. Teachers catch you drawing diagrams instead of practicing handwriting, muttering about ratios and forces, even before you know the official words. There's a little-known fringe tidbit about you, the kind historians mention with a raised eyebrow. As a boy, you built water wheels powered entirely by mice running inside them like tiny, terrified engineers. It wasn't cruelty. You fed the mice, cared for them, probably apologized to them like a tiny ethical philosopher. But you needed motion. You needed to test your ideas. And if mice were the only employees available, well, welcome to the world's first questionable R&D department. Your inventions become local curiosities. Village kids gather around you like you're performing magic tricks, though you treat it more like field research. Every toy you build makes you hungry for the next one. Every mechanism you understand makes you want to crack something bigger. But you don't say any of this out loud. You keep your theories tucked behind your teeth, where adults can't dismiss them or twist them into chores. Your inner world becomes a clockwork cathedral. Gears, shafts, swinging pendulums, and invisible forces humming behind everything you see. When rain taps against the window, you imagine forces pulling droplets down like unseen puppet strings. When wind bends tall grass, you study the patterns like a military tactician, trying to catch nature revealing a secret. Even the chickens become test subjects. You chase them not for fun, but to study velocity. Light joke. That's what you told yourself anyway. The chickens probably disagreed. Eventually, your mother sends you to King's School in Grantham, where the world widens like a freshly opened book. Streets bustle, markets clatter, people argue about politics, bread prices, and whether wearing too many layers causes moral decay. You carry a notebook everywhere, but it's not for assignments. It's for sketches of sundials and water clocks. You build a perfect one in the schoolyard so accurate, that neighbors check your sundial when the church bell rings late. Historians still argue whether this sundial was your first public scientific achievement or simply the earliest recorded instance of you showing off. Both seem correct. At Grantham, you lodge with the Clark family, where you finally experience something resembling warmth and stability. Mrs. Clark notices your curiosity and encourages it, placing books in your hands as if handing a spark to dry tinder. You devour them: Euclid, geometry, basic astronomy. You start solving problems no one asked you to solve, filling mental shells with theories, questions, and diagrams. One evening, you watch Mr. Clark repair a mechanical clock. The gears click, the springs tighten, the pendulum sways with hypnotic precision, and something in you clicks too. Clocks are not just objects, they are models of the universe. Everything that moves. From planets to falling, apples to whispered insults from classmates, must follow a law, a rule, a rhythm. And you become obsessed with rhythm. You time how long it takes raindrops to slide down glass. You measure the length of your own footsteps. You calculate the angle at which sunlight enters the window at different times of day. You start treating your own heartbeat as a metronome for the cosmos. But your real breakthrough isn't a gadget. It's the realization that things are predictable not because God micromanages every leaf and pebble, but because the universe runs on invisible mechanisms. Rules you can uncover if you're brave enough to look. You are brave. You are relentless. And somewhere in the distance, in a future not yet imagined, a falling apple is waiting for you, patient, silent, and ready to change everything. You arrive at school every morning with ink-stained fingers, pockets full of string, pebbles, and half-finished diagrams, essentially the starter pack for introverted future world changer. But your classmates don't see genius. They see a quiet boy who mumbles to himself, stares at clouds too long, and builds miniature fortresses out of twigs behind the schoolyard wall. And children, as you quickly learn, are nature's least reliable jury. You try to blend in. Truly you try. But blending in requires, well, interest. In gossip, in games, in who kicked whose sheep. Meanwhile, you're busy trying to calculate why raindrops sometimes splatter and sometimes roll. Light joke. Your social skills lag behind your math skills by approximately 16 centuries. There's one boy in particular, a bully named Arthur Storer. Bigger, older. The type who thinks critical thinking means criticizing your haircut. He mocks you relentlessly, calls you Isaac the Mute, pushes your books to the floor. Once, he steals your handmade windmill toy and snaps it in half like cheap firewood. Something inside you tightens. Not anger, not fear. Something colder, sharper, resolve. One mainstream historical fact. This rivalry actually changes your life. Newton scholars often mention that Storer's bullying awakened a competitive fire in you the moment you decided to rise, academically and socially, just to outrank him. Historians still argue whether that determination came from ambition or pure, unfiltered pettiness. Honestly, probably both. So you begin a quiet war. You study longer than him, copying equations by candlelight until your eyes ache. You practice handwriting until your quill trembles. You read every book you can borrow, geometry, Latin, philosophy. When you don't understand something, you build a physical model of it, as if the universe must yield its secrets when carved into wood. Your teachers notice. Most students answer questions. You answer them and propose two alternative solutions. You begin leaving your classmates behind, the way a hawk leaves behind chickens, effortlessly, silently, almost regretfully, almost. But solitude grows deeper the smarter you become. While others gather in noisy clumps at lunch, You sit under a tree with a slice of bread and a head full of diagrams. You're not lonely exactly. You're just misaligned, built for another frequency. You watch their games like an anthropologist, studying a population that will one day be extinct. There's a fringe tidbit about you, one rarely mentioned outside academic circles. You kept a small personal notebook where you listed 48 sins you believed you had committed as a child, peeping on others, striking my sister, making pies on Sunday. It reads like the confessions of a medieval Boy Scout with anxiety. But buried in that list is something revealing. You're already cataloging your own mind, testing yourself the way you test the world. Your intellectual rise becomes undeniable when the headmaster assigns rankings. You're not just passing Arthur Storer, you're blowing past him like you're powered by mouse-operated water wheels. One morning, he looks at you with something new in his eyes. Not mockery, not anger, confusion. As if he's realizing you've become someone beyond his reach. But your victory isn't complete. Not yet. You decide to surpass him in every subject, every test, every recitation. Revenge becomes academic excellence. This is probably the only school rivalry in history that ends with one participant inventing calculus. As you rise, your teachers wonder what to do with you. Some think you're a prodigy. Others think you're a problem. You exceed the curriculum before the ink dries on their lesson plans. You correct them politely, but still, you ask questions that make them sweat under their powdered wigs. You are 13, and already exhausting. Yet beneath your growing brilliance, solitude coils like a quiet snake. You don't have close friends. You speak so little that when you do, people freeze, as if witnessing a rare, astronomical event. You write notes instead of sharing feelings. You sketch diagrams instead of telling secrets. You build windmills instead of building friendships. Historians still argue whether this loneliness shaped your genius or your genius shaped your loneliness. It's a debate as circular as your sundial. What we do know is this. Solitude becomes your native habitat, a silence you carry everywhere, a silence you sharpen into insight. But one day, you decide silence is no longer enough. You carve your initials onto a wooden beam in the attic of the Clark home, a tiny, private declaration that you exist, that you're here, that you're more than the bullied boy from the schoolyard, that you will not be forgotten. And somewhere deep inside, for the first time, you feel it, the faint gravitational pull of destiny, tugging at your thoughts like a whisper from the future. You don't know what it means yet, but soon you will. You're a teenager now, which, in 17th century England, means you're expected to help with farm work, maintain proper manners, and ideally, avoid burning down the house. You fail spectacularly at all three, not because you're rebellious, but because your mind drifts away from cows and cabbage, and toward forces, angles, levers, and celestial mechanics nobody around you can even pronounce. Your mother, hoping to bring you back to Earth, decides you should leave school and learn to become a farmer. This is the worst vocational mismatch in human history. You walk through fields staring at clouds. You forget to shut gates. You let sheep wander into other people's gardens because you got distracted watching how wind curls around hedges. One mainstream historical fact. Local farmers really did complain you were utterly hopeless at agriculture. Historians still argue whether you were sabotaging the job intentionally or simply too enchanted by geometry to notice livestock committing misdemeanors. Your mother grows frustrated. You grow miserable. And eventually, everyone agrees. You are not farm material. You return to school rescued, ironically, by your own incompetence. Back at Grantham, you reclaim your favorite refuge, the attic room at the Clark house. It becomes your sanctuary, your laboratory, your mental fortress. You lock the door, slip the iron key into your pocket, and breathe out a long, shaky exhale. Silence floods the room. Dust floats lazily through sunbeams, like tiny galaxies suspended in amber light. And for the first time, you feel something like ownership over your own mind. Inside that locked room, you begin experimenting with everything you can find. Candles, prisms, paper kites, lenses, springs, even bits of scrap metal. You create elaborate diagrams across the walls and hide notebooks beneath floorboards. You drip melted wax onto threads and study how they curl. You observe how shadows stretch with the afternoon sunday. You chart the moon's path from a tiny attic window and try to match it to mathematical ratios you haven't formally learned yet. And you make things. Strange things. One fringe tidbit historians adore. You built a tiny paper lantern, tied it to the tail of a kite, and sent it up at night, creating what was essentially a proto-UFO over rural England. Villagers panicked, thought it was a wandering spirit. Meanwhile, you stood in a field, squinting at your homemade ghost, absolutely thrilled with yourself. You have zero regrets, but your attic lab isn't just about invention, it's about control. For the first time, you can lock the door on purpose. You can shut out the noise, the expectations, the loneliness. You can make the world small enough to understand. A single room becomes a universe, with rules you get to test, measure, revise, and sometimes break just to see what happens. The key becomes symbolic. You turn it slowly, each time, savoring the click. That click means freedom. That click means escape. That click means you, at last, are the master of something, even if that something is just a cluttered attic full of half-finished experiments. Historians still argue whether your obsession with secrecy started here or later at Cambridge. But everyone agrees, your genius thrived when no one else was watching. Solitude wasn't the absence of company, it was the presence of clarity. One evening, the wind pushes rain against the attic window like a restless hand. You hold a small prism to the candle flame. A sharp beam of white light passes through, splintering into a rainbow on the wooden wall. Red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, violet, a perfect spectrum. You lean closer, breath shallow, heart fluttering. For the first time in your life, you whisper aloud, as if the air itself deserves to know. So light is not simple, and something shifts in your bones. A quiet earthquake. You don't understand the full meaning yet. That will come later, with experiments that will set the Royal Society on fire. But this moment, this tiny rainbow trembling on rough wooden boards, becomes the seed of a revolution. Meanwhile, downstairs, Mrs. Clark hears floorboards creaking and assumes you're pacing over homework. She has no idea you're about to dismantle the foundations of optics from a room full of laundry baskets. Your classmates think you're distant. Adults think you're polite. No one suspects you're building a cathedral of ideas in your attic, brick by invisible brick, preparing for a future only you can see. But late at night, when everyone sleeps, you stand at that window and look out over the village. Lamps flicker, trees sway, clouds drift. The world seems so simple, so gentle, so predictable. Yet you can feel it, the complexity beneath the surface, the hidden gears turning, the laws humming, the strange forces waiting for someone to notice them. And you are noticing, because you're no longer the boy trying to outrun a schoolyard bully. You're the boy who turns the key, the boy who locks the door, the boy who whispers back to the universe when it whispers first. You're 19 when the world shuts down, not metaphorically, literally. In 1665, the Great Plague rolls across England like a dark tide, and Cambridge University closes its doors. Students scatter back to their families, whispering prayers into handkerchiefs, holding sprigs of herbs to their noses, trusting garlic and wishful thinking to keep death away. You join them, traveling back to Woolsthorpe Manor. And in that forced retreat, in that global everyone stay home moment, your entire life pivots. Here's one mainstream historical fact. These plague years, 1665, 1666, become the most productive period of scientific creativity in human history. Historians still argue whether the solitude unlocked your genius, or whether society simply got out of your way long enough for you to hear yourself think. Either way, quarantine becomes your cosmic chrysalis. Woolsthorpe is quiet, almost unnervingly so. The wind hums through orchard branches. Empty fields stretch toward the horizon. Neighbors keep their distance in the world's earliest version of social distancing. You walk the property with a notebook in one hand and a stick in the other, scribbling equations in dirt and carving diagrams into soft bark. While people in cities pray for survival, you're in the countryside, reinventing mathematics. Casual. You sleep in your old childhood room, the one with the drafty window and uneven beams. By day, it becomes your laboratory again. By night, it becomes your observatory as moonlight spills across your notes. You barely eat, you barely speak. You drift through the days like a ghost with excellent handwriting. But isolation does something to you. Something unexpected. It makes the universe louder. You start to notice motion everywhere. Falling apples, spinning wheels, water swirling in a bucket. You watch candle flames tremble in the slightest breeze. And you ask yourself why. Why does smoke rise and curve? Why do shadows stretch? Why do objects fall straight down instead of sideways or swirling off into chaos? You're asking questions children usually ask, but unlike children, you intend to find the answers. Your most famous moment arrives in the orchard. And no, you don't get smacked in the head by an apple-like slapstick comedy. One fringe tidbit. You later clarified that the apple simply fell in your sight, which is early modern English for calm down, it didn't bonk me. But you do stare at that falling apple for a very long time. You watch how it drops straight, predictable, obedient. You wonder, why should that apple always descend perpendicularly? Why should it not go sideways or upwards? And then the question deepens. Why does it fall at all? There, the seed, the spark, the gravitational whisper. You imagine an invisible force reaching through the air, pulling the apple down. Then you imagine that same force reaching farther to the treetops, to the hills, to the clouds, to the moon, to the planets. And a wild, audacious thought blooms. What if the same force that pulls the apple holds the moon in its path? You don't solve gravity in that moment. No scientist solves anything in a single dramatic flash, but you plant the seed. You sketch the idea. You feel gravity brushing the edges of your understanding like a shy guest, waiting to be invited inside. Meanwhile, you begin bending light. You darken your room, punch a tiny hole in a shutter, and let a blade of sunlight cut through the darkness. You place a prism in its path. The beam fractures again, just like in your attic years earlier, but now you are older, sharper, hungrier. You test the angle, rotate the prism, adjust the distance, catch the spectrum on the opposite wall. You realize something profound. Light is not a mixture colored by the prism. Light already contained color. The prism simply reveals what was hiding inside. This discovery is so astonishing that you do what any normal person would do. You lock your room to prevent anyone from interrupting your experiments. Food becomes optional. Sunlight becomes data. You whisper to yourself in the quiet, red, refracted most, violet least, as if taking dictation from the universe. Historians still argue whether your obsession with light began earlier or crystallized here, but everyone agrees that this is when you stop being merely talented and start becoming dangerous to ignorance, to established theories. To anyone who believes truth must stay comfortable. You build makeshift lenses from old glass. You carve wooden mounts. You direct light through prisms, mirrors, and slits. You draw diagrams until your fingers ache. The world outside battles plague. You battle darkness, literally and metaphorically. And yet, with all this feverish creativity simmering inside you, you remain profoundly alone. No peers to debate, no mentors to advise. Only you, your notebooks, and the soft hum of wind sweeping over the fields. You stand at the window some nights, watching stars pulse against the black sky. You feel the cold seep into your bones. You wonder whether those distant lights obey the same rules as falling apples. You suspect they do, and you promise yourself quietly, fiercely, with the determination of someone who has been underestimated since birth, that you will prove it. Not to impress the world, not even to silence your childhood bullies, but because the universe is a puzzle, and you were born with the compulsion to solve it. You return to the orchard the next morning, notebook in hand, breath fogging in the cool country air. The apple tree stands quietly, branches heavy with green-red fruit, utterly unaware that you have designated it the birthplace of a revolution. If trees had opinions, this one would probably ask you to stop staring at it so intensely. But you're in the middle of a thought that refuses to loosen its grip. You kneel on the damp grass and place an apple in your palm. Smooth, cool, perfectly ordinary. And yet, in your mind, it becomes a messenger from the cosmos. Because if apples fall due to some invisible force, then surely everything else does too. What if the planets aren't held in their orbits by crystalline spheres or divine whims, but by the same force pulling at this tiny fruit? One mainstream historical fact: you actually begin calculating the moon's orbit during these plague years, using rough measurements and a half-remembered formula from your Cambridge lectures. Historians still argue whether the early calculation was correct, or whether your numbers needed refinement later, but the boldness of the idea remains breathtaking. You're trying to compute heaven from a farmyard. You lie on your back beneath the tree, squinting up at branches weaving against the sky. A breeze shakes loose another apple. You watch it fall in a clean arc, a perfect reply to the question you haven't finished asking. The universe answers in the language of motion. You nod, as if the apple has agreed to co-author a paper with you. But you don't stop with gravity. Your mind ricochets between questions. If light contains colors, what else hides in plain sight? If apples fall, what pushes planets to trace curves through space? If forces exist, but remain invisible, how many more lie waiting? You begin scribbling diagrams in the dirt circles for orbits, arrows for forces, numbers for distances. Chickens gather behind you, watching with suspicion. Light joke: if poultry ever become astrophysicists, you'll know exactly when it started. The orchard becomes your university. The grass becomes your chalkboard. The falling apples become your lecturers. You learn more in these months than most scholars learn in decades. In your small upstairs room at Woolsthorpe, you continue refining these thoughts. You pace with a candle cupped in your hand, muttering to yourself, writing furiously, crossing out entire pages, starting again. You fill notebooks with equations, diagrams, and half-mad speculations. Some ideas are brilliant, some are wild, and some are so speculative that even future scholars will squint and whisper, "Was he okay?" This leads us to a fringe tidbit. You briefly entertain the idea that gravity might be mediated by invisible, subtle particles, streaming through space early. Imaginative guesswork, predating modern physics. You drop the idea later, but it reveals something essential. Your mind is not content with description. It craves mechanism. You seek the why beneath the how. But inspiration doesn't arrive in a single lightning strike. It arrives in thousands of sparks, over hundreds of days, long walks, long silences, long nights with quill in hand, and wax dripping onto your notes. You begin testing motion more deliberately. You swing a bucket of water in a circle above your head, noting how the water clings to the bottom due to centrifugal force. You study shadows to measure the angle of the sundial. You toss apples forward to compare horizontal and vertical motion. You even time how fastballs roll down planks, adjusting angles and lengths to test acceleration. Historians still argue whether these experiments were formal or improvised, but everyone agrees. You were building the foundations of classical mechanics with tools that would make a modern lab technician cry. Your family watches from a distance, unsure whether you're a quiet genius or simply having a very elaborate breakdown. Your mother brings meals to your door. You often don't notice them until they're cold. The plague rages on outside, but inside, you create a parallel universe where logic triumphs and chaos must obey. And slowly, wonderfully, the pattern emerges. The apple falls because the earth pulls it. The moon does not fall because its sideways motion balances the pull. The planets move because force and motion dance in a perfect, predictable ratio. You haven't written the laws yet. You haven't invented calculus yet. You haven't even returned to Cambridge yet. But the ideas are here fragile, shimmering, forming like frost on a window pane. One night, you step outside and look up at the sky. Stars prick the darkness, ancient and indifferent. But tonight, something changes. The heavens no longer feel unreachable. They feel solvable. You whisper into the night, the same laws for earth and sky. And in that moment, you become something new. A bridge between the orchard and the cosmos. Between falling apples and orbiting moons. Between the ordinary and the infinite. Theories rise in you like constellations. Quiet, steady, immortal. You return to Cambridge after the plague years, with ideas burning so hot inside you, they feel radioactive. But instead of presenting them proudly to your professors, you hide them, bury them in notebooks, protect them like dragon's gold, because you're not ready. The world isn't ready. And also, you're very concerned someone might steal your work before you can perfect it. So you turn to something even more secretive, even more reclusive, even more fitting for a young man who thrives behind locked doors. Alchemy. One mainstream historical fact. Newton wrote far more on alchemy than on mathematics, optics, or physics, combined over 1 million words. Historians still argue whether he pursued alchemy as science, mysticism, or something in between. But regardless of the motive, you dive into it the way other people dive into bad relationships. Intensely, obsessively, and with very questionable sleep habits. Your tiny Cambridge chambers become a furnace of bottles, tongs, powders, oils, melting metals, bubbling mixtures, and suspicious smells strong enough to peel paint off the walls. You stack books on alchemical symbolism, dragons, serpents, suns, moons, obscure Latin phrases that sound like ancient cheat codes. You fill margins with notes, speculations, and the occasional doodle that looks like a zodiac sign having an identity crisis. But alchemy, to you, isn't superstition. It's the missing half of nature. Mathematics describes the world, but alchemy explains its guts. If physics is the body, alchemy is the blood, and you want both. You begin experiments at night, when the halls fall silent and no one is around to ask why the air outside your door smells like roasted metal and divine disappointment. You light a flame under a crucible, watching as lead trembles, softens, glows bright orange. You add a pinch of sulfur, a drop of mercury, a fragment of something you bought from a sketchy apothecary. The mixture hisses. You lean closer. Sparks crackle. A tiny explosion pops against your face. You sit back, eyebrows tingling. Light joke. You never actually lost your eyebrows, but your hairline definitely filed a complaint. This becomes your life. Flame, fumes, notebooks, sleeplessness. One fringe tidbit that few people know. You became so obsessed with alchemy that you once built a special furnace. A wind furnace, capable of reaching temperatures normal fireplaces could never achieve. You used it to attempt transmutations, distillations, and reactions so intense that modern chemists would need protective gear, ventilation systems, and probably a signed waiver. Your friends, the handful you tolerate, grow concerned. You rarely eat with them. You rarely speak. Your nails are stained with mysterious substances. Your clothes carry scents of charcoal, vinegar, and metals whose names your doctor shouldn't hear unless he wants to panic. Historians still argue whether your mental breakdown later in life was linked to mercury poisoning from these experiments. The evidence is enticing but uncertain. What is certain is this. You were inhaling things a human should not inhale. But alchemy also gives you something else, something invaluable, a language for transformation. You begin thinking of nature, not as a static machine, but as a living process. Metals can become other metals. Light can become color. Force can become motion. Ideas can become laws. This fluidity, this sense that everything is connected and mutable, becomes the philosophical backbone of your later breakthroughs. You pour powders onto plates and study how they spread. You burn herbs and observe how smoke curls. You dissolve silver in acid and watch it vanish. You heat mercury until it beads like living metal. Everything transforms. Everything reveals a secret if pushed hard enough. You stay awake until your candle gutters and dies. You relight it. You keep going. Some nights, when your chamber is thick with fumes, you open a window to gasp fresh air and see the moon hanging heavy over the rooftops. You remember the orchard. You remember the apple falling. You remember the way theories bloomed inside you like seeds cracking. And in the moonlight, another realization drifts toward you. Alchemy isn't about turning lead into gold. It's about turning ignorance into understanding. It's about transformation of matter, of mind, of the invisible laws binding everything. You stand at the window, crucible cooling behind you, and you whisper not to any person, but to the universe. Reveal yourself, and you swear just for a moment the night answers with a shimmer of promise. Light becomes your obsession again, fiercer, deeper, almost territorial. You've tasted the edge of a secret during the plague years, and now you want the whole truth. You want to dissect light the way an alchemist dissects metals. Heat it, bend it, break it, force it to confess its nature. And so, in your dim Cambridge room filled with glass shards and chalky diagrams, you begin the experiments that will ignite one of the most vicious scientific feuds in history. It starts with a simple prism, a wedge of glass you bought for a few pence from a local instrument maker. You darken the room. You punch a tiny hole in the shutter. A blade of sunlight enters, clean and sharp as a whispered command. You place the prism in its path. The beam fractures, a spectrum spills across the wall like liquid jewels. Red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, violet. You whisper the colors under your breath like a spell, as if summoning an ancient spirit. And then you do something no one else has done. You think of light not as a single pure essence, but as a collection of ingredients. One mainstream historical fact. you discover that each color refracts at a different angle, a phenomenon no one has formally explained before. Historians still argue whether you recognize the full implications immediately, or whether the revelation grew slowly across a dozen experiments. But what matters is this. You see the invisible mechanics of light. You rotate the prism, you move the screen, you isolate colors with slits. You recombine beams with a second prism, and when they merge back into white, your breath catches. Because this is proof. Elegant, undeniable proof. White light is not pure. Prisms do not create colors, they reveal them. You have just rewritten optics. Naturally, you tell no one. Months pass, seasons change. You fill notebooks with diagrams, rainbows sliced, recombined, bent, cataloged. You become so obsessed with light that your neighbors assume you're dabbling in witchcraft. Light joke. Technically, they're not wrong. You're doing spectral witchcraft with math. Eventually, your results leak into Cambridge lecture rooms. Word spreads. The Royal Society, the intellectual lion's den of London, takes interest. And this is where your peaceful rainbow romance becomes a war. You submit your findings. Hesitantly, nervously. You've kept your ideas secret for years, fearing theft or ridicule. But the world is ready, or so you think. The Society publishes your work. People gasp. Scholars murmur. Eyes widen. And then the backlash hits. Enter Robert Hooke. Brilliant, sharp-toned, respected, and absolutely furious. Hooke believes you're wrong. Not partially wrong. Entirely wrong. He thinks color is a modification of light, not an inherent property. He accuses you in polite, academic phrasing that still leaves scorch marks of misunderstanding your own experiments. One fringe tidbit. Hooke once described himself as the inventor of the true theory of light, then implied you lacked proper experience. You respond internally with the scientific equivalent of, "Oh, really?" Thus begins the war of light. Letters fly, pamphlets circulate, scholars take sides, students gossip in taverns over ale and roast mutton. You write long defenses filled with razor-edged logic. Hooke writes counterattacks laced with venom. The Royal Society watches like spectators at a boxing match no one paid for, but everyone is fascinated by. Historians still argue whether this feud shaped your personality or simply amplified traits already in you. Secrecy, sensitivity to criticism, a desire for control. But the conflict leaves scars. You retreat further into solitude. You refuse to publish more ideas for years. You lock your discoveries behind metaphorical iron doors. And yet, your work survives. Your prism experiments are too precise, too elegant, too correct to ignore. Young scholars whisper your name with awe. Old professors grind their teeth. The colors spilled across your wall begin spilling across Europe, reshaping the future of physics. One evening, after a particularly long day of lecture and debate, you sit alone in your darkened room. The prism rests on your desk like a crystal fang. You turn it in your fingers. Candlelight fractures through it, casting tiny rainbows across your notes. You feel the weight of the feud, the brilliance, the isolation, the cost, and you murmur into the quiet. The truth is not always gentle. Outside, the moon climbs through a gap in the clouds, pale, silent, refracted not by glass, but by atmosphere. A reminder, even the sky agrees with you. Your room at Cambridge becomes a shrine to obsession glassware piled like fragile bones, crucibles stained from experiments that no sane person would perform indoors, windows cracked open just enough to vent fumes that would make a modern chemist scream into an OSHA manual. You don't notice the smell anymore. You don't notice much of anything except the burning need to understand the universe at a level no one else has even attempted. You sleep irregularly 30 minutes here, an hour there. Nights dissolve into days. Meals appear at your door and disappear untouched. Your candle burns so low it fuses with the metal holder. Sometimes you realize you've been awake for so long your own handwriting starts leaning sideways, as if trying to lie down. And this is where things begin to crack. One mainstream historical fact. By your early 40s, you suffered what today would likely be classified as a full nervous collapse, a period of extreme paranoia, emotional volatility, and mental exhaustion. Historians still argue whether mercury poisoning from your alchemical experiments contributed, or whether decades of secrecy, rivalry, and self-imposed isolation finally pressed too hard on your mind. But the truth is probably both, stirred together like volatile reagents in your mental crucible. In the weeks leading up to that collapse, you behave strangely. You stop trusting your colleagues, even friends. You think people are plotting against you, stealing your ideas, whispering in dark corners. You believe a letter you haven't received might contain hidden insults. You suspect Hook is sabotaging your reputation. Okay, to be fair, Hook was definitely insulting you, but still. You begin reinterpreting simple phrases as coded attacks. This is the paranoia talking. This is the fumes talking. This is the years of perfectionism sharpening their claws. One fringe tidbit. You wrote frantic letters during this period accusing a close friend, Samuel Pepys, of betraying you only to apologize later in a tone that radiates embarrassed genius energy. You are unraveling, and you knew it, even if you couldn't stop it. Your alchemy experiments become darker, more obsessive. You try to purify metals until they glow with impossible colors. You heat mercury until it moves like liquid moonlight. You read ancient manuscripts by firelight, whispering incantations that were probably meant metaphorically but feel dangerously literal at 2 in the morning. You inhale vapors that sting your throat. You taste powders you absolutely should not taste. Light joke. On the list of Newton's worst ideas, sampling alchemical substances ranks somewhere between staring at the sun and starting a feud with every scientist in London. Your mind starts folding in on itself. You pace your room for hours, muttering equations and biblical prophecies as if trying to stitch together science and mysticism into one perfect, impossible tapestry. You fill entire pages with symbols only you understand. You scratch out sections violently when the ratios feel wrong. Your quill snaps. Your patience snaps. Something inside you begins to tear. And then, one night, you break. Not with a scream, not with a dramatic collapse, but with a quiet, terrifying stillness. You sit in your chair, staring at a candle flame that refuses to stay still, and you feel your thoughts unravel into threads of smoke. You try to write, your hand shakes. You try to speak. Nothing comes out. Your friends intervene. They find you pale, exhausted, trembling, refusing food. You insist you're fine, the universal sign that you're absolutely not fine. You accuse one friend of secretly working with Hook. You accuse another of wishing for your downfall. You accuse a third of lying about something trivial. This isn't logic. This isn't you. This is the moment the bowls, the crucibles, the long nights, the pressure, the solitude, the expectations, all of it finally catch fire. Historians still argue about the exact cause. Some say mercury poisoning. Some say overwork. Some say unprocessed childhood trauma stirred into academic warfare. But everyone agrees, your breakdown marks the darkest point in your life. And yet, something strange happens. Recovery. Slow, halting, imperfect recovery. Friends check on you. Colleagues send gentle letters. You withdraw from the public eye for months. You stop experimenting. You stop writing. You let the fire die down. For once, you allow yourself to be human instead of a relentless equation-solving machine. And in that fragile quiet, a realization surfaces. You cannot be only the alchemist. You cannot be only the physicist. You cannot be only the mathematician. If you wish to survive, truly survive, something must transform in you. Alchemy taught you that. You breathe, you rest, you step out of the smoke, and slowly, painfully, the genius begins to knit itself back together, tempered, scarred, but unbroken. You emerge from your breakdown like someone stepping out of a long, feverish, dream eyes sore, mind bruised, heart thinned out like overworked parchment. And just as you're piecing yourself back together, the universe tosses you a plot twist nobody sees coming. You become a crime-fighting economist. Yes, you, the man who reinvented mathematics, battled light itself, and nearly dissolved his sanity in mercury fumes, are appointed warden of the Royal Mint in 1696. A job normally given to well-connected nobles to sit in a chair, sign a few papers, eat lunch, go home. But not you. No, you take the job personally. One mainstream historical fact. England's currency system at the time was collapsing under an epidemic of counterfeiting. Coins were clipped, shaved, filed, melted, and re-stamped faster than the treasury could count them. The economy teetered on disaster. Historians still argue whether you took the job for stability, patriotism, or because you wanted a new arena where your enemies, Hook included, could not follow. Whatever the motive, you turn the mint into your laboratory and London into your experiment. You begin by studying coins with the same obsessive attention you once gave prisms. You weigh them, measure them, catalog inconsistencies. You pace the mint halls, muttering calculations about silver content and loss ratios. Clerks whisper that you look less like an administrator and more like a man interrogating the economy with mathematical force. And then you take a darker turn. You go undercover. One fringe tidbit that often sounds too wild to be true, but is. You disguise yourself, wander into London taverns, brothels, and black markets, and interrogate counterfeiters personally. You listen to rumors. You observe coin shaving techniques. You slip into back rooms where illegal minting tools glow in the firelight. You collect names, dates, confessions. Imagine the world's greatest physicist, leaning over a table in a smoky tavern, pretending to be a customer while actually memorizing the faces of criminals. Light joke. Somewhere in this timeline, you're basically Batman with worse social skills. But your methods aren't just intense, they're ruthless. You build legal cases with chilling precision. You track networks of forgers like celestial orbits. You interrogate suspects with a cold, analytical patience that terrifies even hardened criminals. And when you gather enough evidence, you prosecute them. This isn't metaphorical. You bring them to trial. You testify. You help send them to prison and, occasionally, to the gallows. You, the man who once hid from conflict behind locked doors, now wield the law like a blade. One counterfeiter in particular, William Challoner, becomes your nemesis. Brilliant, manipulative, charismatic, and extremely skilled at fraud. He mocks the mint. He mocks Parliament. He even mocks you, calling your methods overzealous and your authority laughable. Bad move. You pursue him with a vengeance, sharpened by years of academic feuds and unspoken fury. You gather dozens of testimonies. You unravel his entire network. You track his operations from London alleys to workshop attics. You corner him legally, logically, and relentlessly. Historians still argue whether your pursuit was driven by justice or by a personal need to dominate an adversary who reminded you a little too much of your past critics. but the outcome is certain. Challoner is convicted and executed. Your victory is complete, chillingly so. Yet something shifts in you during your years at the Mint. You discover a new kind of power, not the power of equations or theories, but the power to impose order on chaos, to enforce truth, to shape society as surely as you once shaped science. You redesign England's entire coinage system. You implement the Great Recoinage. You stabilize the economy. You become indispensable to the crown. The shadows of counterfeiters retreat. The Royal Mint becomes a fortress of precision. And you, Isaac Newton, become its ghost. Quiet, watchful, calculating. But your alchemist instinct never disappears. You still slip into your study late at night, staring at molten metals, turning coins in the light, wondering if transformation of matter, of money, of men follows rules you haven't yet discovered. You've mastered apples. You've mastered light. You've mastered criminals. Now, for the first time, you begin to wonder, what of your own transformation? Are you still the awkward boy staring at raindrops? Or have you become someone else entirely? Someone forged in fire and shadow. The air in the Mint is cold. The halls echo with footsteps long gone. You hold a newly minted coin between your fingers, polished and sharp-edged. And somewhere deep in your mind, deeper than gravity, deeper than alchemy, something whispers. Everything is measurable, even the ways we change. By now, you are Sir Isaac Newton, Warden of the Mint, enemy of counterfeiters, master of coinage, the man who bends economies back into shape with the same intensity you once applied to bending beams of light. But the public sees only half of you, the respectable half, the scientific half, the half that fits neatly into lectures and portraits and coin engravings. The other half, the hidden half, is something else entirely. Because late at night, when the Mint grows quiet and London fog rolls across the rooftops like a slow-moving ghost, you lock your door, pull your chair close to the fire, and open the books that truly haunt you. Ancient scrolls, prophetic manuscripts, alchemy treatises, biblical codes you believe contain the blueprint of all history. One mainstream historical fact. Newton wrote extensively, obsessively about theology, prophecy, and biblical interpretation. More pages than on physics, more pages than on math. You analyzed scripture with the same rigor you applied to planetary motion. Convinced the universe hid messages that only a mind like yours could decrypt. Historians still argue whether this was the real Newton, the secret Newton, or simply the human need for meaning expressing itself through the gears of genius. You surround yourself with dusty volumes, the Book of Daniel, Revelation, Hermetic texts, esoteric diagrams, filled with circles, beasts, horns, timelines, cosmic patterns. You copy passages slowly, reverently, as if you're transcribing the heartbeat of time itself. You write notes in Latin, marginalia in Greek, secret observations in an encoded shorthand only you can read. You produce elaborate calculations, attempting to determine the exact dates of key biblical prophecies. You analyze the Temple of Solomon with architectural precision, convinced its dimensions hide cosmic ratios. Fringe tidbit. You predicted the world would not end before the year 2060. Not because you expected apocalypse, but because you believed in a long arc of divine mathematics. Yes, Isaac Newton, the man who defined gravity, also spent years doing prophecy math like a doomsday accountant. You dig into forbidden alchemical texts that medieval scholars swore contained the secrets of divine transformation. You copy symbols of suns, moons, dragons, and chalices. You map them onto scripture. You link elements of alchemy to the four horsemen, You try to reconcile Hebrew prophecy with celestial mechanics. It is, frankly, the most ambitious crossover event in history, and through it all, a strange conviction burns in you. Truth is one thing, not many things, not a messy pile of unrelated facts. One unified truth, threaded through physics, scripture, chemistry, light, gravity, time. You become obsessed with finding that thread. You read until your eyes ache. You write until your quill splits. You rub your temples with fingertips stained with ash and ink. You pace your room whispering. The universe speaks in patterns. 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 Your colleagues don't know about this part of your life. Or if they do, they consider it a quirk, something to sigh about privately. The way people sigh about a friend who collects too many knives or names all his plants. They have no idea the depth of your devotion, but you know. You feel the pull of prophecy as strongly as the pull of gravity. In your mind, the cosmos is a cathedral built from mathematics, scripture, and secret fire. Every physical law is a hymn. Every celestial motion is a verse. Every alchemical reaction is a metaphor. God hid in matter, like a riddle, waiting for a worthy solver. Historians still argue whether this mystical side hindered your science or fueled it. But the truth is simpler. Your genius was a spectrum, just like light. What the world sees as science and mysticism were, to you, two colors from the same beam. One night, after hours hunched over a manuscript, you lean back and stare into the flame of your candle. The room is so still you can hear your own pulse. Shadows bend across your bookshelves like living geometry. You lift a page closer to the light and watch gold ink shimmer faintly along the margins. You whisper a quiet confession. I want to understand the mind of God. And for a moment, whether from exhaustion, faith, or the refractive trickery of candlelight, it almost feels like the universe whispers back. Not answers, not revelations, just the soft promise that the search itself is holy. You close the book slowly, the leather warm in your hands. Outside, the fog swallows the moon. The world sleeps, but you remain awake, a silent, solitary figure, chasing meaning through equations and prophecy alike. The scientist, the mystic, the seeker, the man who believes truth is a spectrum, and he was born to split it. You have spent years circling the edges of a book you are too afraid or too exhausted to write. Ideas sit inside you like loaded stars. Gravity, motion, celestial mechanics, the mathematics that ties falling apples to orbiting moons. You've carried these theories since your plague years, sheltered them, fed them, argued with them in the dark. But the time has come for them to leave your notebooks and enter the world. And the world is not gentle. You wouldn't have written Principia at all if not for Edmund Halley. Yes, that Halley, the comet guy who walks into your life like a cosmic courier. He visits you in Cambridge in 1684 and asks a simple question. What curve would a planet follow under an inverse square force? You answer casually, as if describing the weather. A conic section. Halley stares. You stare. He realizes you've already solved the architecture of the universe, and somehow forgot to mention it. One mainstream historical fact. If Halley hadn't pushed gently, firmly, relentlessly, Principia Mathematica might never have existed. Historians still argue whether your hesitation came from fear, perfectionism, or bitterness toward the Royal Society after your feud with Hooke. But Halley becomes your advocate, your editor, your motivator, your walking, hey, finish your masterpiece, alarm clock. You begin writing. At first, it feels like translating a language only you speak. You scribble equations so fast your ink splatters. You pace your room until the floorboards groan. You write entire sections, tear them up, and rewrite them from scratch. You mutter to yourself so intensely that students walking past your door assume you're arguing with ghosts. Your mind burns. Motion, forces, mass, acceleration, orbits, tides, ellipses, comets, the whole cosmos collapsing into 3 laws and a universal gravitational pull. But the old shadows return. Hook resurfaces, furious, territorial, insisting that your ideas are actually his. He claims he found inverse square law first. He demands credit for discoveries he never fully proved. You respond with increasingly sharp letters. He fires back with increasingly petty ones. The feud reignites like dry tinder. Hallie tries to mediate. He begs both of you to stop. You refuse. Hook refuses harder. The Royal Society watches like parents watching 2 toddlers fight over a wooden spoon. At one point, Hook hints he should be credited in Principia. You hint he should learn how to do actual math. Light joke. Historians still debate whether this counts as shade or solar eclipse. Level pettiness. But Hallie saves the project. He pays for the printing out of his own pocket when the Royal Society claims it lacks funds. Mostly because they spent their money publishing a book about fish. Truly, a fish book. You're rewriting the laws of nature, and the institution responsible for advancing science is broke from marine enthusiasm. Yet the writing continues. You enter trance-like states that last days. You forget to eat. You forget to sleep. At times, you forget where you are. You transform mathematics into a weapon sharp, elegant, merciless. You derive the motions of planets with the same clarity you once brought to analyzing falling apples. And finally, after months of feverish work, Philosophia Naturalis Principia Mathematicae is finished. Your masterpiece, your cathedral of equations, your quiet rebellion against every scholar who underestimated you, every critic who attacked you, every limitation the world placed upon your mind. The book is published in 1687, and the reaction is seismic. Scholars gasp, astronomers bow, philosophers scramble to catch up. The entire intellectual landscape of Europe tilts. You have done it. You have united heaven and earth under one set of laws. No more celestial mysteries governed by angels and perfect spheres. No more earthly physics divorced from cosmic physics. One universe, one mathematics, one gravitational pull. Historians still argue whether Principia is the greatest scientific book ever written, or merely one of them. But everyone agrees. You changed the world. Not through spectacle, not through arrogance, through relentless precision, maddening discipline, and the kind of quiet fury only a lonely genius could weaponize. And yet, when the applause settles, when the debates cool, when rivals grumble but eventually bow, you take the book in your hands and feel only a strange, aching calm. Not triumph, not glory, something softer, the knowledge that the universe is no longer indifferent. It has answered you, and you, the storm-born child who once stared at falling snowflakes, have answered it back. Fame does not arrive like a parade. It arrives like fog, quietly, gradually, and with a chill that seeps into the bones before you realize the world has changed around you. After Principia, you become something rare in 17th century England. A celebrity whose only weapon is a quill. Scholars quote you with trembling respect. Young mathematicians imitate your diagrams the way aspiring artists copy Rembrandt. Even critics start their attacks with, "Sir Isaac is undoubtedly brilliant, but you've become the center of gravity in the scientific world." And gravity, as you know, is a force of attraction, but also a prison. You are elected to Parliament. You sit in chambers filled with powdered wigs and political noise, wondering why people care more about tax disputes than the motion of comets. You speak only once during your entire time in office. One mainstream historical fact. The only recorded sentence you ever uttered in Parliament was to request a window be closed because of a draft. Historians still argue whether this was shyness, disinterest, or the universal British need to comment on the temperature. Yet your silence becomes part of your mythology. People project brilliance onto it. They assume your thoughts operate on a plane above petty human affairs. You don't correct them. Silence is easier than explaining the truth that you feel out of place everywhere except inside equations. As your fame grows, your loneliness deepens. Your colleagues no longer treat you as an equal. Some fear you, some worship you, some resent you. Hallie remains a friend, but even he can't bridge the widening gap between the man and the legend. You walk through Cambridge courtyards and London streets like a ghost wearing a prestigious wig. You are appointed president of the Royal Society in 1703. The institution that once doubted you now bends around your presence like planets around a star. But leadership requires diplomacy, patience, social graces, and you possess exactly none of these in sufficient quantity. You prefer sealed doors, quiet rooms, and problems that can be solved without speaking. Still, you preside. You judge papers. You guide debates. You enforce standards with precision sharp enough to cut. Some scholars adore you. Others mutter that the society has become a monarchy of one. And then there's the matter of Hooke. Robert Hooke dies in 1703, the same year you rise to the presidency. He leaves behind bickering students, scattered manuscripts, and no confirmed portrait. A fringe tidbit, whispered by some, with a raised eyebrow. During your presidency, Hooke's only known portrait disappeared from the Society's collection. Historians still argue whether this was an accident or whether the universe simply obeyed your long-standing wish to never see his face again. But even victory feels hollow. You sit in the grand chair of the Royal Society, surrounded by books, instruments, and scholars, and realize you have climbed to the highest peak of intellectual life and found it cold. The applause has faded. The praise has become background noise. The debates you once leaped into now feel tiring, predictable. You have become the authority others cite, which means you have no authority left to challenge. For a man who lived on questions, certainty becomes a kind of cage. You try to return to your old passions. Alchemy still calls to you in whispers. Biblical codes tug at your imagination. But the fire is dimmer now. The mercury fumes no longer thrill you. They only remind you of trembling hands and sleepless nights. You feel age stretching across your joints like a slow frost. And yet, the world will not let you rest. Visitors knock at your door. Students write you long, worshipful letters. Royal Society members seek your approval like knights seeking the blessing of a king. You try to respond with grace, but each interaction drains you a gentle erosion no equation can model. At night, you walk alone through your rooms at the Mint, brushing your fingers along cold stone walls. You pause at the window, watching London flicker beneath the moon. You think of the orchard at Woolsthorpe, the silence, the falling apples, the pure clarity that once lived inside your mind. You whisper to the darkness, "Have I gone too far from myself?" No one answers. Historians still argue whether your later years produced true innovation or whether you had already completed your greatest work. But the truth, the quiet truth, is this. Genius gives you the universe and takes away the world. You are admired, respected, feared, nearly deified, and unbearably lonely. Your crown is made not of gold, but of gravity, a force that holds everything in place, yet allows nothing to escape. You grip the windowsill, Feel the chill seep into your palm and remind yourself of a truth only you truly understand. Even the brightest star is alone in its own orbit. Age creeps into your life, the way dusk creeps across a countryside field slowly at first. Then all at once, your hair fades from iron to ash. Your hands tremble when you write too long. Your eyes, once sharp enough to detect the slightest perturbation in a star's path, now blur when you stare at the fine print of your own notes. You've spent a lifetime dissecting the universe, and now the universe quietly begins its dissection of you. But you don't rage against it, not at first. You simply observe, as though age itself is another phenomenon to measure, another force to chart. You move between two worlds now. The public world where you remain president of the Royal Society, knighted, revered, an ornament of the British crown, and the private world where your thoughts turn inward, toward old manuscripts, unfinished equations, and alchemical riddles you never solved. 1. Mainstream historical fact. You revisited your earliest papers in your old age, correcting errors, clarifying definitions, and sometimes rewriting entire sections just because a phrase annoyed you. Historians still argue whether this was perfectionism, boredom, or a subtle fear that time might distort your meaning. But you work with quiet urgency, as though tidying your intellectual house before a long journey. Your alchemical notebooks remain your most guarded secrets. Even now, decades after mercury fumes nearly cracked your mind, you still feel the pull. You crack open leather-bound manuscripts filled with cryptic diagrams, suns dissolving into circles, dragons coiling around glass vessels, geometric shapes merging into biblical symbols. You trace your own handwriting younger, steadier, more hopeful, and feel an ache that no mathematical law can quantify. A fringe tidbit historians love. In these later years, you attempted to decode what you believed were ancient alchemical recipes hidden beneath layers of deliberate obfuscation. You spent nights comparing symbols like a detective, working a centuries-old cold case. Sometimes you muttered aloud. Sometimes you prayed. Sometimes you simply stared at the page until the ink shimmered in the candlelight like something alive. But there's something else you become obsessed with. Your legacy. Not fame, you've had enough of that. Not statues, those belong to kings. Not even immortality alchemists chase it. But you, ironically, never believed in literal elixirs. You want accuracy. You want the truth of your work preserved. No distortions. No misquotes. No claims from rivals who died long before you. No myths you didn't authorize. You write carefully, deliberately, as though the universe will grade your final drafts. And yet, despite your precision, you feel something slipping beyond your control. A quiet fear, small but insistent, that people will misunderstand you, misuse you, turn your name into a symbol instead of a person. You sense it already. The reverence, the distance, the way younger scholars flinch when you enter a room. You've become an institution, a monument, a marble ideal, and somewhere along the way, you lost something soft and human. You feel it when you look in the mirror. You feel it when you sit alone at night, staring at a candle that flickers like a dying star. You keep secrets for every published law, a dozen private theories, for every celebrated discovery, a hidden failure, for every crisp equation, a whispered prayer, for every scientific triumph, a mystical speculation you never dare reveal. You carry these contradictions like coals in your pocket, warming, burning, reminding you of who you were before the world carved you into a symbol. Historians still argue whether your secrecy was fear, pride, or simply habit. But deep down, you know the truth. Some ideas were too fragile to expose. Some theories too strange. Some questions too sacred. As age advances, You begin giving away possessions, distributing books, organizing manuscripts. You write reflections on prophecy. You revise your chronology of ancient kingdoms. You work until your hands shake so badly, you have to guide the quill with your other hand. And then one evening, as rain taps gently against your window at Kensington, you pause mid-sentence. Your fingers hover above the page. You listen to the rain, soft, steady, familiar, and for the first time in a long while, you let yourself remember the orchard, the falling apple, the plague year quiet, the rainbow splitting across your attic wall, the mouse-powered water wheels, the whisper of revelation. You close your eyes. You realize something simple and painful. You have lived a life in pursuit of a universe that never once promised to reveal itself. And yet, piece by piece, you forced it to speak. Not through violence, but through persistence. Not through magic, but through wonder. Not through certainty, but through asking again and again the questions others were too afraid to ask. Your candle burns low. Your ink dries. Your breath slows. You think not of fame, nor rivalry, nor crowns, nor positions. You think of light, fractured, unified, hidden, revealed. The last transformation, the one even alchemists cannot capture. Your final years settle over you like the soft dust that gathers on your old manuscripts quietly, gently, without announcement. You live in Kensington now, far from the orchards of Woolsthorpe, far from the smoky lecture halls of Cambridge, far from the mint's echoing stone corridors. The rooms here are warm, carpeted, filled with polished wood and heavy drapery. Servants pad quietly through the halls. Visitors arrive with reverence, often whispering as though entering a cathedral rather than a home. And you, Sir Isaac Newton, the man who measured the heavens, moves through these rooms like a ghost who hasn't yet realized he's fading. You sit more often than you stand now. Your knees ache. Your breath shortens on cold mornings. Your hair, once long and dark, falls in pale waves around a face lined with the fine cracks of time. But your eyes still burn. Not brightly, but steadily. Like embers that refuse to go out. People come to see you, scholars, lords, young mathematicians trembling with awe. They ask for advice, blessings, confirmation. They recite your laws back to you as though you've become scripture. You nod politely, answer sparingly, and watch them leave with shining eyes. They look at you as if you're marble already. You wonder when you stopped being a person to them. One mainstream historical fact. In these later years, you allowed a series of grand public portraits to be painted. Historians still argue whether you did this out of vanity or necessity, whether you wished to shape your legacy or simply accepted the world's need to enshrine you. But the result is the same. Images of you spread across Europe, turning your living face into an icon. And icons, you've learned, are lonely. At night, after the last servant has retired and the house falls quiet, you walk slowly down the hall to your study. You use a cane now, polished wood, smooth under your palm. Your hand trembles as you lower yourself into the chair. The candle on your desk flickers, casting soft gold light across stacks of manuscript pages. Some pages contain mathematics sharp enough to draw blood. Others hold alchemical recipes written in coded Latin. Others are meditations on prophecy, the apocalypse, the architecture of sacred temples. You smile faintly. You were never one thing. The world kept trying to make you pick a side scientist or mystic, rationalist or alchemist, but you refused. You stood between worlds, not out of confusion, but out of hunger. You wanted the whole truth, even if it shattered into 1,000 colors. Tonight, you don't work. You simply sit, breathing slowly, listening to the quiet tick of the mantle clock. time, the only force you never defeated, whispers through the room like a patient teacher. A fringe tidbit. In your very last conversations, you reportedly said that you felt like a child on the shore of a vast ocean, playing with a few smooth pebbles while the great sea of truth lay undiscovered before you. It is perhaps the most honest sentence you ever spoke. Historians still argue whether this was humility or melancholy. But you know, it was both. Because despite all your triumphs, gravity, calculus, optics, laws of motion, the universe remains bigger than any one mind, even yours. You lean back in your chair. Your breath slows. The candle flame bends slightly in a draft, and for a moment, its light fractures across the glass ink bottle on your desk, splitting into a faint rainbow. You watch the colors. You smile softly. Even now, light insists on reminding you who you are. You rise with effort and move to the window. Outside, the night sky stretches across London like a velvet canopy. Stars shimmer, distant and cold and indifferent. Yet they comfort you. They have always comforted you, because you devoted your life to them, not to the stars themselves, but to the laws that tell them how to dance. You press your hand against the window frame to steady yourself. The wood is cool beneath your palm. The glass reflects your face, aged, tired, and softened. But in your eyes, you still see the boy from Woolsthorpe staring upward, asking questions the world had no language for yet. You whisper into the darkness, "I have held shadows, and weighed starlight, and learned so little." It is not regret. It is wonder. A deep, gentle wonder that has followed you since the moment you watched an apple fall and wondered why. You return to your bed with slow, deliberate steps. The sheets are crisp. The room is dim. A servant asks softly if you need anything. You shake your head. You lie down. The mattress sinks slightly beneath your weight. Your breath grows shallow. Your pulse slows. Your thoughts drift not toward fame, nor rivals, nor equations. Toward light. Toward motion. Toward the hidden gears of the universe you spent a lifetime trying to touch. And as the final sleep comes for you, you do not fear it. You have spent your entire life turning darkness into understanding. Now the darkness feels familiar. A place where colors hide before they're broken into brilliance. A place where truth waits. A place where even gravity loosens its hold. And now, as the last scene fades, and the final candle of this long journey flickers low, let your breath fall into an easy rhythm. Let the edges of thought soften, like chalk lines blurred by a gentle hand. Picture the old study in Kensington. The candle's glow settling over scattered papers. The faint rainbow on the ink bottle. The chair still warm where a lifetime of questions once Saturday. Imagine the quiet. Imagine the hush of a room after someone steps out of it forever. Not sadness, just stillness. Just the way a great mind leaves behind a gentle echo when it finally rests. Let your shoulders loosen. Let the weight of the day slip from you the way Newton once set aside his quill, surrendering the universe to the night. Think of the orchard at Woolsthorpe, the soft thud of apples and grass, the hush of wind through branches, the sky stretching wide and unbroken. Picture stars blooming overhead, patient and ancient, watching as centuries drift by. Picture the boy lying in the grass, studying the art of a falling fruit, unaware that he is changing the future. Let that image breathe inside you. Let it remind you that even the smallest questions can lead to galaxies, that even the quietest moments can shape eternity. That wonder is its own kind of light. Now, breathe slowly. Feel the calm widen around you like a night sky opening. Feel your thoughts drift toward gentler places. Feel your body sink, softened into rest. Tonight, the universe holds you lightly. Tonight, gravity loosens its crown. Sleep well, traveler of stories. Sleep under starlight and soft shadows. Sleep knowing that curiosity, yours, Newton's, all of ours, is the quiet miracle that keeps the world alive.